Commander Sarah Chun pressed her face against the reinforced viewport of the research vessel Pathfinder, watching the alien landscape unfold below. After 18 months of deep space travel, the sight of a potentially habitable world still made her heart race. But this wasn't just any world. This was Kepler 442c, home to the Vorthak, a species that had been classified as extreme predators by the Galactic Council. The briefing files painted a terrifying picture. The Vorthak were described as ruthless hunters with razor-sharp claws, enhanced night vision, and an instinctual drive to kill anything that moved. Their society was supposedly built on violence and dominance, with the strongest ruling through fear and intimidation. The Council had warned that any contact should be approached with maximum caution, if at all. Yet here Sarah was leading the first human diplomatic mission to their world. Earth's government believed that humanity's unique perspective might bridge the gap where other species had failed. Humans, after all, had evolved from both predator and prey ancestors, giving them an understanding that purely herbivorous species lacked. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," announced Lieutenant Torres from the communication station. "It's unusual." Sarah moved to the center of the bridge. "Put it through." Instead of the expected growls or threatening roars, melodic tones filled the air. The sounds were hauntingly beautiful, almost like whale songs mixed with wind chimes. The universal translator struggled for a moment before rendering the message into English. "Welcome, Sky Travelers. We sense your peaceful intentions. The young ones have prepared a special place for your arrival. Please follow the guidance signals to the Garden of First Meetings." Dr. Amara Okafor, the mission's xenobiologist, looked up from her scanner readouts with confusion. "Commander, this doesn't match any of the behavioral profiles we were given. The Vorthak aren't supposed to have complex artistic expressions or welcoming committees." Sarah frowned. Maybe the Council got it wrong. Wouldn't be the first time intelligence reports were based on incomplete data. The ship followed the gentle guidance beacons toward a clearing in what appeared to be a vast forest. As they descended through the atmosphere, Sarah could see that the forest wasn't natural at all. The trees were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, with flowing waterways creating intricate designs between groves. Gardens of impossible beauty stretched to the horizon, featuring plants in colors that didn't exist in Earth's spectrum. "My God," whispered Engineer Jackson from his station. "Look at the scale of this. It's like they've terraformed their entire continent into one massive botanical paradise." The landing zone was a circular clearing surrounded by towering trees whose bark seemed to shimmer with bioluminescent patterns. As the Pathfinder settled onto the soft grass, Sarah could see figures moving among the tree line. Her first glimpse of the Vorthak sent a chill down her spine. They were indeed formidable predators. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, they moved with fluid grace on powerful legs. Their elongated heads featured rows of sharp teeth, and their hands ended in claws that could easily tear through metal. But something was off. Instead of the aggressive postures described in the files, these beings moved with careful deliberation. They kept their distance from the ship, almost as if they were nervous. "Commander," called out Dr. Okafor, "I'm reading multiple life signs approaching, but they're moving in coordinated patterns. This isn't hunting behavior. It's more like a ceremonial formation." Sarah made her decision. Full environmental suits, but weapons stay secured. If they wanted us dead, they would have shot us down already. She turned to her team. "Remember, we're here to learn, not to judge based on old reports." The airlock cycled, and Sarah stepped onto alien soil for the first time. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar flowers and rich earth. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth's, but manageable. What struck her most was the sound. Instead of the violent chaos she'd expected, she heard what could only be described as singing. Multiple voices harmonized in complex patterns that seemed to emerge from all around them. A group of Vorthak approached slowly, their movements deliberate and non-threatening. The largest of them, distinguished by intricate patterns of scars that Sarah realized might be decorative rather than battle wounds, stepped forward. When it spoke, the translator rendered its words with surprising eloquence. "I am Kethvar, speaker for the Young One Circle. We welcome you to the Garden of First Meetings, grown by our cubs in anticipation of this day. They have worked for many seasons to create something worthy of beings who travel between stars." Sarah felt her preconceptions crumbling. "Young ones? You mean children created this?" Kethvar's expression, if it could be called that on such an alien face, seemed almost proud. Yes, when we learned that sky travelers might visit, the Cubs insisted on preparing a welcome. They said that beings capable of crossing the void between worlds deserve to see the beauty our kind can create, not just our strength. Dr. Okafor was already taking readings, her excitement barely contained. Commander, the complexity of this ecosystem is extraordinary. These are just gardens, they're integrated biomes. Each section supports the others in ways I've never seen before. As they walked deeper into the garden, Sarah began to understand the scope of what they were seeing. Towering structures that looked like living architecture rose from the ground, trees that had been grown and shaped rather than cut. Bridges of woven vines spanned crystalline streams that sang as water flowed over specially placed stones. Flowers the size of umbrellas provided shade, while releasing pheromones that seemed designed to promote calm and well-being in visitors. How long did this take to create? Sarah asked, genuinely awed. 12 seasons, Kethvar replied. The Cubs began when they first detected your radio signals reaching our world. They studied your transmissions, learned what they could of your preferences, and began growing this space accordingly. Lieutenant Torres, who had been quietly scanning the area, suddenly looked up in alarm. Commander, I'm detecting movement. Large groups converging on our position. Sarah tensed, but Kethvar remained calm. You are about to meet the architects themselves. Do not be alarmed by their enthusiasm. Young ones often forget that not all species share our resilience. The approaching sounds grew louder, running footsteps and excited chattering. Sarah braced herself, hand instinctively moving toward her sidearm before she caught herself and forced her hand back to her side. What emerged from the gardens was not what any human would have expected. Young Vorthak, perhaps equivalent to teenagers by human standards, came bounding through the paths they had created. Despite their fearsome appearance, all claws and teeth and predatory grace, their behavior was unmistakably that of excited children showing off their work. They surrounded the human delegation, chattering in their musical language while maintaining a respectful distance. Sarah noticed that several of them carried what appeared to be gifts, flowers, crystalline formations, and small living creatures that glowed with soft bioluminescence. One of the young Vorthak, smaller than the others and with brighter coloring, approached cautiously. Through the translator, its voice came across as high-pitched and eager. Are you the beings from the third rock around the yellow star? We grew special, night-blooming flowers because your transmissions showed you appreciate beauty in darkness. And we created the singing streams because we heard music in your signals and thought you might enjoy harmony. Sarah found herself speechless. The Galactic Intelligence reports had described a warrior race incapable of art or compassion. Yet here were their children, having spent years creating beauty for visitors they had never met, based on nothing more than intercepted radio transmissions. Dr. Okafor knelt down to the young Vorthak's level, her scientific training overriding any fear. This is incredible work. How did you know which plants would create these colors together? The youngster's eyes, large and multifaceted, seemed to light up with joy at the question. We studied how light behaves in your atmosphere and tried to recreate those wavelengths with natural pigments. The purple-gold flowers required crossbreeding 17 different species, but we wanted visitors from a blue-sky world to feel welcome under our green sky. Engineer Jackson was examining one of the living architectural structures with obvious admiration. The engineering here is phenomenal. These support beams are grown, not built, but they're supporting massive weight loads. How did you calculate the stress distributions? Another young Vorthak bounded over, clearly delighted to explain. We observe how storms affect our natural forests and grow our structures to flex and bend rather than break. Your people build rigid structures that fight against natural forces. We grow living ones that dance with them. As the tour continued, Sarah realized that everything they had been told about the Vorthak was either wrong or grossly incomplete. Yes, they were predators. Their physical form made that undeniable. But they were also artists, engineers, philosophers, and nurturers of the highest order. The young ones had created not just a garden, but a living testament to interspecies understanding. The path led to a central clearing where a massive tree grew, its trunk easily 100 feet in diameter. Platforms and walkways spiraled up its length, creating a multi-level community space that buzzed with activity. Adult Vorthak could be seen tending to smaller gardens, teaching young ones, and engaging in what appeared to be academic discussions. This is the heart tree, Kethvar explained. It was the first thing our cubs planted when they began this project. They said that any garden worth showing to star travelers needed a heart. Sarah approached the base of the tree and saw that its bark was covered in intricate carvings, not battle scenes or hunting trophies as the reports had suggested Vorthak art would feature, but delicate depictions of planets, stars, and what appear to be various alien species living together in harmony. "Your children carve these?" she asked. "Yes," Kethvar replied, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. They imagined what a galaxy at peace might look like. Each figure represents their hopes for understanding between different kinds of life. Dr. Okafor was taking detailed recordings, her excitement growing by the minute. "Commander, we need to completely reassess our understanding of this species. The level of ecological sophistication here suggests a civilization that's been working with biological systems for millennia, not the recently civilized hunter culture described in our files." One of the young Vorthak tugged gently at Sarah's sleeve with a clawed finger, careful not to damage the fabric. "Would you like to see the night garden? We grew it specifically for species with limited night vision. It uses bioluminescent plants to create patterns that tell stories." Sarah nodded, finding herself genuinely eager to see more. As they walked toward another section of the vast garden complex, she noticed that the young Vorthak moved differently than the adults. Where the adults were careful and measured, the young ones displayed an infectious enthusiasm that reminded her of human children excited to show off a school project. The night garden was a masterpiece of living light. Pathways wound between trees and bushes that glowed with soft blues, greens, and purples. The patterns weren't random. They told stories. Sarah could make out narrative sequences depicting the first plants on their world, the evolution of their species, and what appeared to be their first glimpse of the stars. "We wanted to share our history with you," explained the young Vorthak who had become their unofficial guide. "But we also wanted to ask about yours. Your radio signals contained so many stories. We hope we might trade tales." Lieutenant Torres, who had been quietly documenting everything, looked up from his recorder. "Commander, this completely changes the diplomatic situation. If the Council's assessment was this far off about their culture..." Sarah nodded grimly. The implications were staggering. If the Galactic Council had so thoroughly misunderstood the Vorthak, what other species have been written off as irredeemably hostile? How many opportunities for peaceful contact have been lost because of incomplete or biased intelligence? As the alien sun began to set, the gardens transformed. Nocturnal flowers opened, releasing new fragrances into the air. Bioluminescent creatures emerged from hidden nooks and crannies, creating a living light show that took Sarah's breath away. The young Vorthak gathered in small groups, their natural harmonizing creating a symphony that seemed to encourage the light-producing organisms to pulse in rhythm. "We wanted tonight to be special," Kethvar said, appearing beside Sarah as she watched the light show. "The Cubs have been practicing this display for months. They call it Songs for the Star Swimmers." "Star Swimmers?" Sarah asked. "Their term for beings who travel between worlds. They believe that anyone capable of crossing the void must possess a special kind of courage and wonder. They wanted to honor that." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with the alien atmosphere. "Kethvar, I need to ask you something difficult. Have other species visited your world before?" The tall alien's posture shifted subtly, becoming more guarded. "Yes, several have come. Most do not stay long." "What happened with them?" "They see our claws and teeth. They observe our hunting practices. They witness our physical capabilities." Kethvar's voice carried a note of old sadness. "They conclude that we are dangerous and leave quickly. Some demand that we change our nature before they will consider trade or friendship." "But you are predators," Dr. Okafor said carefully. "That's not a judgment, it's an observation. How do you reconcile your hunting nature with this?" She gestured at the peaceful garden around them. "The same way your species reconciles being descendants of both hunters and gatherers," Kethvar replied. "We are what we are, but we choose what we become. Yes, we hunt. It is our nature and our necessity. But we also create, nurture, and dream. The Cubs understand this better than many adults. They do not see contradiction where others see only conflict." As if summoned by their conversation, The young Vorthak, who had been their guide, approached with something cupped carefully in his clawed hands. "We have a gift for the star swimmers," he said formally. "Seeds from the heart tree, grown with hopes for friendship. If you plant them in your sky vessel, perhaps the dream of connection will grow between our worlds." Sarah accepted the seeds. They were crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "We're honored to receive them. But I have to ask, why did you go to all this trouble for beings you'd never met?" The young Vorthak tilted his head in what might have been confusion. "Is this not what intelligent beings do? When someone new comes to visit, you prepare your best welcome. You show them beauty instead of fear. You offer friendship instead of suspicion." The simple wisdom of it struck Sarah like a physical blow. Here were beings that galactic civilization had written off as savage predators, and their children understood diplomacy and hospitality better than most seasoned ambassadors. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself drawn into deeper conversations with both the adult Vorthak and their enthusiastic offspring. She learned that their society was far more complex than any outsider had realized. Yes, they were hunters, but they hunted with reverence and sustainability. Their violence was ritualized combat used to settle disputes and establish social hierarchies, not unlike human martial arts or competitive sports. More importantly, their young were not raised to be mindless killers. They were educated in philosophy, art, biological sciences, and what could only be described as ecological engineering. The garden they stood in was just one example of their capabilities. The young Vorthak spoke casually of atmospheric processors, living spacecraft, and biological computers that were beyond current human understanding. "Why doesn't the galaxy know about this?" Sarah asked Kethvar as they stood beside the singing stream, watching bioluminescent fish create patterns in the water. "Because they do not ask," he replied simply. "They see our form and assume our function. When we try to explain our culture, they interrupt to warn us about our aggressive tendencies. When we attempt to share our technology, they fear we will use it as a weapon." Sarah felt a growing anger, not at the Vorthak, but at the cosmic scale misunderstanding that had kept humanity from knowing about these remarkable beings. What would happen if the galaxy saw this place? If they understood what your people are capable of? "Perhaps then," said the young Vorthak, who had stayed near them throughout the evening, "the galaxy might be ready for the gifts we have to offer. We have learned to grow ships that repair themselves, to create ecosystems that adapt to any environment, to engineer biological systems that work in harmony rather than conflict." Dr. Okafor looked up from her endless documentation. "The implications are staggering. If they can grow living spacecraft and self-adapting ecosystems, they can help solve resource shortages, environmental damage, even space habitation challenges across known space. But first," Kethvar added quietly, "someone would have to look past the claws and teeth to see the hands that planted these gardens." Sarah made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. "Then, that's exactly what we're going to help them do." As the alien night deepened around them, Sarah Chan stood in a garden created by children who had dreamed of friendship with beings they had never met, surrounded by a species that had been condemned by fear and misunderstanding. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of rewriting everything the galaxy thought it knew about the Vorthak. But tonight, she simply marveled at the beauty that could emerge when young minds were allowed to imagine a better universe. The next morning brought new revelations that challenged everything Sarah thought she understood about interspecies dynamics. She woke in the guest quarters the Vorthak had prepared, living structures grown from modified trees that provided perfectly comfortable sleeping spaces while maintaining the feeling of being outdoors. The walls were semi-permeable, allowing fresh air to flow through while keeping out insects and maintaining ideal temperature through some form of biological climate control. Dr. Okafor was already up, taking readings on everything she could get her scanner near. "Commander, you need to see this. The biological engineering here is beyond anything in our current understanding. These walls aren't just grown, they're programmed. The tree responds to occupancy, adjusts humidity and temperature, and I think it's even filtering toxins from the air." Sarah stretched, feeling more rested than she had in months despite being on an alien world. "Any word from the ship?" "Lieutenant Torres has been in communication with Earth all night. Command is skeptical about our initial reports." Sarah wasn't surprised. The idea that the galactic community had completely mischaracterized an entire species would be difficult for anyone to accept, especially military leadership, that it spent decades operating under established protocols for dealing with hostile predators. A gentle musical chime announced the arrival of their young Vorthack guide from the previous day. Through the translucent wall, Sarah could see him waiting patiently outside with what appeared to be a breakfast tray. "Enter," she called, still marveling at how the living walls recognized her voice and opened accordingly. "Good morning, star swimmer Sarah," the young Vorthack said, carefully setting down a tray of fruits and what appeared to be some form of protein. "I am called Growing Toward Light, though your translator may render that differently. The elders have asked me to accompany you today as you learn about our ways." "Growing Toward Light," Sarah repeated, testing the translation. "That's a beautiful name. How old are you?" 47 of your years, though I'm still considered young by our standards. We live much longer than your species, perhaps 3 times as long. I will not be considered fully adult for another 20 years. Sarah nearly choked on the fruit she was tasting. 47? But you seem so young? Enthusiastic? Yes, the other species who have visited often comment on this. They expect us to be serious and dangerous from hatching. But why would we deny ourselves the joy of wonder and learning simply because we are capable of violence? The breakfast was surprisingly delicious. The fruits had flavors that reminded Sarah of Earth crops, but with subtle differences that made them uniquely alien. The protein turned out to be some form of cultivated algae that tasted remarkably like chicken. Dr. Okafor joined them, her arms full of scanning equipment. "Growing Toward Light, I have to ask, how did your people develop such advanced biological engineering? Our records suggest your species only achieved spaceflight within the last few centuries." The young Vorthack's expression shifted to what Sarah was learning to recognize as confusion. "Spaceflight? We have been traveling between worlds for over 2,000 years. Who told you otherwise?" Sarah felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. The Galactic Council's records indicate that the Vorthack were a pre-spaceflight civilization until approximately 300 standard years ago. "Ah," Growing Toward Light said, his tone becoming more formal. "You refer to when we began using metal ships like other species. We had been traveling in grown vessels for millennia before that, but other species did not recognize our bioships as real technology. We were told our methods were primitive and dangerous." Dr. Okafor set down her scanner with a sharp click. "Commander, if they've been spacefaring for 2,000 years, that completely changes the timeline of galactic expansion. It means the Vorthack were among the earliest space-traveling species, not recent additions to the galactic community. But the records," Sarah began, "are written by those who decide what counts as civilization." Growing Toward Light finished gently. "When the Council evaluated us, they dismissed our living ships as uncontrolled biological hazards and our cities as overgrown wilderness. We were told that to join galactic society, we would need to abandon our primitive ways and adopt proper technology." Sarah felt sick. "So you built metal ships to satisfy their requirements." "Some of us did. Others refused and were labeled as stubborn primitives or dangerous isolationists. The galaxy has known only those Vorthack who were willing to pretend to be something they were not." The implications were staggering. If the Galactic Council had systematically excluded or misrepresented species that didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable technology and social structure, how many other civilizations have been marginalized or misunderstood? "Growing Toward Light," Sarah said carefully, "would it be possible for us to see one of your bioships?" The young Vorthack's eyes literally brightened. A bioluminescent response Sarah was learning indicated excitement. "Yes, the elders hoped you would ask. There's a young ship in the orbital nurseries. She's almost ready for her first long journey, and her growth tenders have been eager to show their work to beings who might appreciate biological engineering." Within an hour, Sarah's team was aboard a Vorthack transport, itself a marvel of bioengineering that moved through the atmosphere with the fluid grace of a living creature. The ride was silent except for the ship's gentle humming, which Growing Toward Light explained was its way of maintaining optimal internal conditions. The orbital facility was unlike anything in human experience. Instead of metallic structures bolted together in the harsh geometry of space, organic shapes flowed and curved in ways that suggested growth rather than construction. Ships in various stages of development hung from umbilical connections, looking more like fruit on cosmic trees than vessels of exploration. "This is Sings Between Stars," growing toward light, announced as they approached a ship that was perhaps half the size of the human vessel. She will be ready for her maiden voyage to the edge of your solar system within the next few months. Dr. Okafor was practically vibrating with excitement. The hull appears to be living tissue. How does it survive in vacuum? A new voice answered. An adult Vorthack who introduced herself as Stone Beneath Water, the ship's primary growth tender. The same way your own cells survive in an environment hostile to life, by creating their own protected ecosystem. Sings Between Stars generates her own atmosphere, processes her own nutrients, and repairs any damage automatically. Lieutenant Torres, who had joined them from the ship, ran his engineering scanner over the hull. I'm reading cellular activity throughout the entire structure. This isn't just biological materials used in construction. This is a living entity. Yes, Stone Beneath Water confirmed. She is as alive as I am, though her consciousness is different. She dreams of the spaces between stars and songs of solar wind. When she is ready, she will choose her own crew based on compatibility. Sarah struggled to process the concept. The ship chooses its crew. Of course. Would you want to spend years of your life inside a vessel that found your presence distressing? Sings Between Stars will select crew members whose biorhythms harmonize with her own, whose presence calms rather than agitates her systems. Growing toward light gestured toward the ship's surface, which was beginning to glow with soft patterns of light. She senses your curiosity and finds it pleasant. Would you like to meet her properly? Before Sarah could ask what that meant, Stone Beneath Water placed her clawed hand against the ship's hull. The bioluminescent patterns intensified, and Sarah could swear she heard something like music emanating from the living vessel. Place your hand beside mine, Stone Beneath Water instructed. She wishes to know you. Sarah hesitated only briefly before pressing her palm against the warm, slightly yielding surface. The sensation was immediate and startling, a feeling of presence, of vast intelligence that was utterly alien, yet somehow welcoming. Images flashed through her mind. The depths of space as seen through senses human science couldn't yet explain. The joy of swift movement through stellar wind. The satisfaction of carrying small, warm life forms safely between distant worlds. She likes you. Growing toward light observed with delight. She finds human biorhythms interesting, different from ours, but not discordant. She would enjoy carrying your kind on long journeys. Dr. Okafor was documenting everything frantically. The neural activity I'm reading suggests intelligence levels comparable to higher mammals, possibly even approaching human cognitive levels in some areas. Higher in some ways, Stone Beneath Water corrected gently. Sings Between Stars can navigate hyperspace using senses we barely understand. She can detect gravitational anomalies across light years and sense the health of a solar system from its stellar emissions. But she experiences loneliness and joy much like any social creature. Lieutenant Torres was studying his readings with growing amazement. Commander, the energy efficiency alone is revolutionary. This ship could make journeys our vessels couldn't attempt without massive fuel reserves or supply stops. Sarah was beginning to understand the true scope of what humanity had stumbled into. The Vorthack weren't just a misunderstood species. They represented an entirely different approach to technology and space travel that could revolutionize galactic civilization. Growing toward light. How many species know about your bioships? Besides yourselves? Very few. Most species react with fear or disgust when they learn our vessels are alive. They worry about contamination, uncontrolled reproduction, or the ships developing hostile intentions. Have any of those concerns ever been valid? Never. Stone Beneath Water replied firmly. Our ships are grown with careful genetic safeguards and deep psychological conditioning toward cooperation and protection of crew. A bioship that threatened its passengers would be as aberrant as a Vorthack parent who attacked their own cubs. As they toured more of the orbital facility, Sarah saw ships designed for different purposes, some optimized for long-range exploration, others for carrying large populations, still others that seemed designed for research or communication across galactic distances. Each was unique, grown rather than built, shaped by the needs of its intended purpose and the artistic vision of its growth tenders. The diversity is incredible, Dr. Okafor marveled. No two are exactly alike, but they all share underlying design principles that suggest sophisticated understanding of both biology and engineering. One section of the facility housed what Growing Toward Light called the memory ships, vessels designed to carry the accumulated knowledge and cultural heritage of the Vorthak people. When we first began encountering other space-traveling species, he explained, we realized that our way of preserving knowledge was considered primitive by galactic standards. We kept our histories and discoveries in living repositories, organisms bred to store and share information across generations. But the Council insisted that proper civilizations use mechanical computers and digital storage. Sarah examined one of the memory ships through the viewing port. It resembled a vast neural network, with branching structures that pulsed with bioluminescent activity. How much information can something like that store? All of it, Stone Beneath Water answered simply. Every discovery, every cultural development, every individual Vorthak's contribution to our civilization across the last 50,000 years. And unlike your digital systems, the information evolves and grows, making new connections and generating new insights continuously. Lieutenant Torres looked up from his scanner in disbelief. That's impossible. No biological system could have that kind of storage capacity or processing power. Your own brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, each capable of forming thousands of connections, Growing Toward Light pointed out. Scale that up to a structure the size of a starship, and you begin to understand what becomes possible. The tour continued into areas that challenged human preconceptions even further. They saw workshops where Vorthak grew tools and equipment from specially designed organisms, laboratories where they developed new life forms to solve environmental problems, and nurseries where young Vorthak learned to tend and guide biological systems. This is why your children were able to create that garden, Sarah realized. They've been educated in biological engineering from an early age. Yes, Growing Toward Light confirmed. Every Vorthak learns to work with living systems. It is as natural to us as your children learning to read or perform mathematics. In one section, they encountered a group of young Vorthak working on what appeared to be atmosphere processors, biological systems designed to terraform worlds for habitation by various species. One of them, noticing the human visitors, eagerly explained their current project. We are developing an ecosystem that could make the desert worlds in a Rigel system habitable for both silicon-based and carbon-based life forms simultaneously. The challenge is creating symbiotic relationships between organisms that evolved under completely different chemical conditions. Dr. Okafor stared at the complex biological models floating in nutrient baths. You're talking about solving one of the greatest challenges in galactic colonization. Most species can only terraform worlds to suit their own biology. Why limit ourselves that way? The young Vorthak asked with genuine confusion. The galaxy contains such wonderful diversity. Should we not try to preserve and accommodate all of it? As their visit to the orbital facility drew to a close, Sarah found herself fundamentally changed in her understanding of what was possible. The Vorthak had developed technologies that were not only more advanced than anything the galactic community recognized, but based on entirely different principles. Instead of imposing their will on the universe through mechanical force, they worked in harmony with natural systems to achieve results that seemed almost magical. Growing Toward Light, she said as they prepared to return to the surface, what would your people need to share these technologies with the galaxy? The young Vorthak exchanged glances with Stone Beneath Water before answering carefully. Recognition, not just of our capabilities, but of our right to exist as we are. We have tried for centuries to participate in galactic civilization, but always on terms that require us to deny our nature and abandon our ways. What if that could change? Then perhaps, Stone Beneath Water added, the galaxy might finally be ready to learn what cooperation between different forms of intelligence can achieve. As they descended back toward the garden world, Sarah began formulating a plan that would either revolutionize galactic civilization or end her career in spectacular failure. But watching the living ship respond to its tender's gentle guidance, feeling the harmony between technology and biology that the Vorthak had achieved, she knew she had to try. The stakes were too high to do anything else. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that traditional approaches couldn't solve. Climate restoration, resource depletion, the difficulty of long-range exploration. All of these could be addressed by biological technologies the Vorthak had spent millennia perfecting. But first, she would have to convince a galaxy that had spent centuries fearing the Vorthack that their children's garden was just the beginning of what was possible when fear gave way to understanding. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of Sarah's initial report reaching Earth. Representatives from 12 major species gathered in the Great Amphitheater on Nexus Station, their translator devices working overtime to convert the babble of languages into something approaching unified discourse. Sarah stood at the center podium, her human delegation flanked by holographic displays showing everything they had documented on the Vorthack world. Preposterous, declared Ambassador Zenthka of the Thurian hegemony, her crystalline form crackling with agitation. The Vorthack are confirmed predators. Our behavioral analysts have studied them for decades. They cannot suddenly transform into botanical engineers. Sarah kept her voice level despite her growing frustration. With respect, Ambassador, your analysts never actually visited their world. They based their conclusions on limited observations of Vorthack, who had already been forced to conform to Council expectations. The Altarian representative, his gas form shimmering with skeptical patterns, interjected through his mechanical voice box. Even if we accept your claims about their gardening abilities, Commander Chun, that does not negate their fundamental nature. A predator remains dangerous regardless of its hobbies. Which brings us to the real issue, Dr. Okafor said, stepping forward. We've been operating under the assumption that being a predator automatically makes a species hostile or untrustworthy. But humanity evolved from predators too, and we're sitting in this council chamber engaging in civilized discourse. A ripple of discomfort went through the assembly. The fact that humans were descended from hunters was something the galaxy had struggled with during humanity's admission to the council 50 years earlier. Many species still viewed human military capabilities with suspicion. Ambassador Veldar of the Pacifican Collective rose from her kelp-like appendages, speaking in the melodious tones of her aquatic species. The humans make a valid point about predatory heritage, but the Vorthack represent a different level of concern. Our xenobiologists classify them as apex predators with enhanced aggression markers. Based on what evidence? Sarah challenged. Have any of your xenobiologists actually observed Vorthack in their natural environment, or are they extrapolating from superficial physical characteristics? The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. Lieutenant Torres activated the holographic display, showing footage from their visit to the orbital facility. The assembled representatives watched in obvious amazement as the living ships moved with organic grace, their bioluminescent patterns creating what could only be described as beauty in the void of space. Impossible, breathed the Canopian delegate, his feathered crest rising in agitation. Living spacecraft are theoretical at best. The engineering requirements alone are solved by biology rather than mechanics, Dr. Okafor explained. The Vorthack have developed symbiotic relationships with engineered organisms that can survive and thrive in space. Their ships aren't built, they're grown. The hologram shifted to show the memory ships, with their vast neural networks processing and storing information in ways that made traditional computers look primitive. The assembled delegates watched in silence as the biological systems demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in current galactic technology. Ambassador Zenthka's crystalline form had stopped crackling, taking on patterns that indicated deep thought. If this is genuine, Commander Chun, what exactly are you proposing? A complete reassessment of our relationship with the Vorthack, Sarah replied. They've been trying to share their technologies with the galaxy for centuries, but we've consistently rejected their approaches as primitive or dangerous. Meanwhile, they've continued developing solutions to problems we can't even begin to address. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed the terraforming projects growing toward light, had explained. They can create atmospheres suitable for multiple species simultaneously. They can grow spacecraft that repair themselves and navigate hyperspace using biological senses we don't understand. They can store and process information in ways that make our best computers look like stone tools. The Rigelian representative, whose species have been struggling with resource depletion for decades, leaned forward with obvious interest. These terraforming capabilities, how quickly could they transform dead worlds? Their young people are currently working on projects that could make barren systems habitable within a few decades, Sarah answered. But only if they're allowed to work as partners rather than being forced to conform to our technological expectations. The debate that followed was intense and often heated. Species that had spent generations viewing the Vorthack as dangerous primitives struggled to reconcile that image with the evidence of advanced biological civilization. Others worried about the implications of admitting that the Council's assessment protocols were fundamentally flawed. Even assuming their capabilities are as you describe, said the Centaurian delegate, how can we trust beings who could grow weapons we can't even detect? Living ships could be biological warfare platforms. Terraforming organisms could be designed to poison rather than nurture. It was growing toward Light himself who answered that concern. Sarah had requested permission to bring him to the council session, and his presence via holographic link from his homeworld had been reluctantly approved. Honored delegates, the young Vorthack said, his voice carrying clearly through the universal translators. Your fear is understandable, but misguided. Yes, we could theoretically develop biological weapons of tremendous destructive power, just as your species could use their technologies for genocide or planetary destruction. The question is not capability, but intention. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. We have spent 50,000 years learning to work with life rather than against it. Every organism we develop is designed to enhance and preserve rather than destroy. To create biological weapons would require us to violate every principle our civilization is built upon. Pretty words, the Thurian ambassador said dismissively, but intentions can change. Governments rise and fall. What guarantees do we have that future Vorthack generations won't decide to use these capabilities aggressively? The same guarantees you have from any other species, Growing Toward Light replied calmly. None. Trust between civilizations is always a choice based on evidence and interaction, not absolute certainty. But consider this, we have had the capability to develop biological weapons for millennia, yet we have chosen instead to create gardens for visitors we had never met. The truth of that statement hung in the air. The Vorthack children had spent years creating beauty for unknown aliens, based purely on intercepted radio signals and hope for friendship. That fact alone spoke volumes about their fundamental nature. Ambassador Veldar of the Pacifican Collective spoke again, her tone more thoughtful now. Commander Chun, what specific changes are you proposing to Council protocols? Sarah had spent the entire journey back to Nexus Station preparing for this question. First, we need to revise our criteria for evaluating technological advancement. A civilization that works with biological systems isn't primitive. It's following a different but equally valid path of development. She moved to the next point on her prepared list. Second, we need to establish cultural exchange programs that allow species like the Vorthack to share their knowledge without being forced to abandon their fundamental nature. And third, Dr. Okafor added, we need to acknowledge that our assessment of dangerous species may be based on prejudice rather than actual evidence. How many other civilizations have we marginalized because they don't fit our preconceptions? That question sparked another heated debate as delegates realized the implications. If the Vorthack had been so thoroughly misunderstood, what other species might the Council have misjudged? The Andromedan representative, whose species rarely spoke during Council sessions, surprised everyone by rising to address the Assembly. The humans raised troubling questions about our evaluation methods. My own people were initially classified as dangerous because our natural energy discharges can overload electronic systems. We were required to develop dampening fields before being allowed near Council facilities. Other delegates began sharing similar stories. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Species after species had been forced to suppress or abandon their natural capabilities to meet Council standards for acceptable civilization. What you're describing, said Ambassador Zenthkos slowly, isn't civilization. It's conformity. Sarah seized on that opening. Exactly. We've been so focused on making everyone fit the same mold that we've missed incredible opportunities for collaboration and growth. Growing Toward Light's image shifted as he consulted with other Vorthack off-screen. When he returned his attention to the Council, his demeanor had become more formal. Honored delegates, I have been authorized to make an offer on behalf of my people. If the Council is willing to establish new protocols for cultural and technological exchange, we will share 3 critical technologies immediately. The chamber fell silent. Even the most skeptical delegates leaned forward to hear what he would propose. First, atmospheric restoration techniques that can reverse the damage done by industrial pollution within standard decades, rather than centuries. Second, biological computers that can process information faster and more efficiently than any mechanical system, while generating their own power from ambient energy. Third, living spacecraft that can travel farther and faster than current vessels while requiring no fuel or external resources. The implications were staggering. Atmospheric restoration could save worlds already written off as uninhabitable. Biological computers could revolutionize everything from research to communication. And self-sustaining spacecraft could open up regions of the galaxy that were currently unreachable. What would you require in return? Asked the Rigelian delegate, his species' desperation for environmental solutions evident in his voice. Recognition. Growing toward light replied simply, not just of our technologies, but of our right to exist as we are. No more demands that we abandon biological engineering in favor of mechanical systems. No more classification as dangerous primitives. And, most importantly, no more isolation from the galactic community. You're asking us to fundamentally change how we evaluate and interact with other species, observed the Centaurian delegate. Yes, growing toward light confirmed. Because the current system has failed. It has created walls where there should be bridges, fear where there should be cooperation, and isolation where there should be unity. Sarah watched the faces of the assembled delegates as they grappled with the choice before them. They could maintain their existing prejudices and lose access to technologies that could solve some of the galaxy's greatest challenges, or they could admit their mistakes and open the door to a new era of interspecies cooperation. The debate continued for hours, but gradually a consensus began to emerge. The evidence was simply too overwhelming to ignore, and the potential benefits too significant to dismiss. Ambassador Veldar was the first to formally change her position. The Pacifican Collective moves to establish a new Council Commission for Technological and Cultural Diversity. We cannot allow our fear of the unknown to blind us to the gifts that different forms of intelligence can offer. One by one, other delegates began to voice support for reassessing council policies. Even Ambassador Zenthka, who had been among the most resistant, eventually acknowledged that the current approach was failing the galactic community. The Thurian hegemony agrees to participate in new evaluation protocols, she announced, though we reserve the right to maintain security measures during initial contact phases. Growing toward light's image brightened with what Sarah had learned to recognize as joy. We understand the need for caution. We ask only for the opportunity to demonstrate that cooperation is more powerful than conquest. As the session drew to a close, the Council voted to establish the new commission and begin immediate negotiations with the Vorthack for technology sharing agreements. It wasn't everything Sarah had hoped for, but it was a beginning. The real change, however, came with the announcement that Growing Toward Light and a delegation of young Vorthack would visit Nexus Station to demonstrate their technologies directly. For the first time in galactic history, a species would be invited to share their knowledge without being required to conform to existing technological standards. There is one more thing, Growing Toward Light said as the formal session concluded. The Cubs who created the Garden of First Meetings have asked me to invite representatives from all council species to visit our world. They wish to create individual gardens for each species, designed to welcome and honor your unique natures. The offer stunned the assembly. After centuries of rejection and misunderstanding, the Vorthack were offering to create beauty specifically for those who had shunned them. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of what they had accomplished. A species that the galaxy had feared and marginalized was offering gifts of friendship to the very civilizations that had rejected them. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, many stopped to speak with Growing Toward Light's hologram, expressing interest in visiting the garden world or learning more about biological technologies. The fear and suspicion that had dominated earlier discussions had been replaced by curiosity and hope. Dr. Okafor joined Sarah at the podium as the chamber emptied. Think it will actually work? Sarah looked at the list of species requesting additional information about Vorthack technologies. I think we just witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary. The question is whether we're ready for what comes next. The answer to that question would determine not just the fate of human-Vorthack relations, but the future of galactic civilization itself. 6 months after the historic council session, Sarah stood in the observation deck of Nexus Station, watching the most extraordinary sight in galactic history unfold before her. The first Vorthack delegation to visit council space in over 3 centuries was arriving aboard one of their bio ships, and the vessel defied every expectation the galaxy had held about proper spacecraft. Sings Between Stars moved through space with the fluid grace of a creature swimming through cosmic ocean currents. Her hull rippled with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to the solar radiation and electromagnetic fields around the station. Where traditional ships would have docking clamps and mechanical interfaces, she extended elegant tendrils that interfaced directly with the station's biological receiving ports. Technology the Vorthack had shared and the station engineers had grown in just 4 months. "She's beautiful," breathed Dr. Okafor, who had become the lead researcher on a newly established biological technology integration project. "I've been studying the technical specifications for months, but seeing her in person is something entirely different." Lieutenant Torres, now promoted to commander and heading the new Interspecies Cooperation Initiative, was monitoring the docking procedure from his command station. Docking sequence is proceeding smoothly. The ship's biological interfaces are synchronizing perfectly with our receiving systems. The integration hadn't been without challenges. Conservative factions within several council species had fought against allowing uncontrolled biological entities near Nexus Station. Extensive testing and safety protocols had been required before permission was granted, but the Vorthack had cooperated with every requirement with patient grace. "Commander Chun," came a voice from the communications array, "the Vorthack delegation requests permission to begin cultural exchange protocols." Sarah smiled. "Tell them they're cleared for full diplomatic procedures. And remind station personnel that our guests have enhanced sensory capabilities. Keep electromagnetic noise to a minimum and no sudden bright lights in the receiving bay." The preparations for this visit had been extraordinary. Each council species had sent representatives to learn about Vorthack technologies and culture. More importantly, several species had begun sharing their own unique capabilities and knowledge systems that had previously been dismissed or overlooked by the Council's standardized evaluation criteria. The crystalline Thurians, it turned out, had developed quantum communication methods that could transmit information instantaneously across galactic distances, but the technology had been classified as esoteric by Council scientists. The gaseous Altarians had perfected energy manipulation techniques that could power entire worlds using stellar wind harvesting, but their non-physical nature had led to their methods being dismissed as impractical for real species. Growing toward light emerged from Sings Between Stars accompanied by 5 other Vorthack, each representing a different aspect of their civilization. There was Stone Beneath Water, the bio ship tender, Patterns and Living Sound, a specialist in biological communication systems, Dreams of Green Stars, an atmospheric engineer, Harmony Between Kinds, a cultural philosopher, and, most remarkably, one of the young gardeners who had created the original garden of First Meetings. The youngster, called First Light on New Soil, had insisted on joining the delegation despite being barely past adolescence by Vorthack standards. The elders had agreed, recognizing that the garden project had originally been a young person's initiative and should be represented accordingly. "Welcome to Nexus Station," Sarah said formally as the delegation entered the main receiving area. The chamber had been specially modified for the visit, with living walls grown from Vorthack-shared seeds and lighting designed to complement their enhanced visual spectrum. "We are honored to walk among the stars with you," Growing Toward Light replied, his translator rendering his words with the melodic undertones that human equipment had learned to preserve. "First Light on New Soil brings greetings from all the young gardeners and a special gift for the beings who first saw beauty in our work rather than threat in our nature." First Light on New Soil stepped forward, carefully carrying a bioluminescent container. "Seeds from every garden we have grown for council species," the youngster explained. "Each one adapted to thrive in artificial environments like space stations so that beauty and life can grow wherever beings gather in friendship." Sarah accepted the gift with genuine emotion. "These will be planted in the new Interspecies Cultural Center. Every species will be able to contribute to a shared garden representing galactic unity." The formal ceremonies concluded, the real work began. Over the following weeks, the Vorthack delegation conducted demonstrations and workshops that revolutionized galactic understanding of what technology could achieve. Dreams of Green Stars showed atmospheric engineers from 12 different species how biological systems could restore dead worlds in decades rather than centuries. Her presentation included living models of atmospheric processors that could be customized for any planetary environment, adapting in real time to changing conditions. The key insight, she explained to the fascinated audience, is working with existing planetary systems rather than replacing them. Every world has unique characteristics that can be enhanced rather than eliminated. We don't create standardized atmospheres. We awaken each planet's potential for supporting life. The demonstration that drew the most attention was her recreation of the Rigelian Home System's atmospheric restoration project. The Rigelians have been struggling with industrial contamination for generations, unable to reverse the damage without destroying their technological infrastructure. Your people have been trying to clean the air while maintaining the sources of contamination, Dreams of Green Stars observed gently. We propose instead introducing organisms that transform pollutants into beneficial compounds, creating a self-sustaining system that improves conditions continuously. The Rigelian chief scientist, his chitinous form quivering with excitement, studied the biological models she had grown. This could save our homeworld within a single generation. What would you require in exchange for this technology? Friendship, Dreams of Green Stars replied simply. And perhaps insights into your people's quantum mechanics research. We have organisms that might benefit from quantum-scale engineering approaches. That exchange typified the new approach to galactic cooperation. Instead of rigid technology transfer protocols with complex payment systems, species began sharing knowledge freely, each contributing their unique capabilities to solve challenges that no single civilization could address alone. Patterns in Living Sound revolutionized galactic communications by demonstrating biological networks that could transmit information at faster-than-light speeds using quantum entanglement between specially engineered organisms. Combined with Thurian quantum communication technology, the result was an instantaneous galactic information network that made real-time cooperation between distant worlds possible for the first time. Communication is the foundation of understanding, she explained during her presentation. When beings can share thoughts and ideas without delay across any distance, barriers of space and time stop creating barriers of comprehension. But it was First Light on New Soil who created the most profound impact. The young Garter's presentations weren't about technology, they were about possibility. Using seeds, soil samples, and basic nutrients, First Light demonstrated how to create beauty and life in any environment, no matter how harsh or limited. Every space can support life, the youngster explained while growing a miniature ecosystem in what had previously been a sterile conference room. The question isn't whether life is possible, but what kind of life will bring the most joy and wonder to those who must live there. The garden that emerged during the demonstration was unlike anything the assembled delegates had seen. Plants from dozens of worlds grew together in impossible harmony, their different biochemistries somehow integrated into a self-sustaining whole. Flowers that required different atmospheric compositions bloomed side by side. Trees that evolved under different stellar radiation spectrums shared nutrients through interconnected root systems. How is this possible? Asked the Andromedan representative, her energy form flickering with amazement. These species should be incompatible. Their basic biochemistries are completely different. Life finds ways to connect. First Light on New Soil replied. We simply help it discover those connections. Every organism wants to live and grow. When you create conditions where helping others thrive also helps yourself thrive, cooperation becomes natural. The philosophical implications were staggering. If biological systems from completely different evolutionary backgrounds could be integrated into cooperative wholes, what did that suggest about the potential for cooperation between different species and civilizations? Harmony between kinds addressed exactly that question in her cultural presentations. Using examples from Vorthack society, she demonstrated how apparent contradictions, predator and nurture, individual and collective, tradition and innovation, could be resolved through what she called dynamic balance. Your galaxy has been seeking unity through uniformity, she observed during one memorable session. You try to make all species fit the same patterns, follow the same technological paths, accept the same social structures. This creates not harmony, but homogenization, a reduction of the galaxy's greatest strength, which is its diversity. She gestured to the mixed garden that now flourished throughout the cultural center. True harmony comes from integration, not elimination of differences. Each species contributes its unique gifts while benefiting from the gifts of others. The result is something greater than any single civilization could achieve alone. The demonstrations reached their climax when Stone Beneath Water announced that Sings Between Stars had agreed to take representatives from multiple species on a journey to the edge of the galaxy, something no mechanical vessel had ever attempted. She is curious about the deep void, Stone Beneath Water explained. Her senses detect structures in dark space that your instruments cannot perceive. She wishes to explore these mysteries, and she would welcome companions who share her wonder about the unknown. The volunteer list filled within hours. Scientists, philosophers, artists, and explorers from every council species requested inclusion in what would be the most ambitious expedition in galactic history. But the most significant development came when First Light on New Soil approached Sarah with a proposal that would change everything. Commander Chun, the young Vorthak, said privately, "The elders have been discussing your species' unique position in galactic society. Humans bridge the gap between predator and prey heritage, between technological and biological approaches, between individual achievement and collective cooperation." Sarah waited, sensing something momentous approaching. "We would like to propose a formal alliance between our species," First Light continued. "Not just for technology sharing or trade agreements, but as partners in helping the galaxy discover what becomes possible when differences become strengths rather than sources of conflict." The proposal was elegant in its simplicity. Humans would serve as cultural translators, helping other species understand and integrate Vorthak biological approaches while helping the Vorthak understand the perspectives of species who thought in more mechanical terms. Together, they would establish research stations, cultural centers, and exploration missions throughout the galaxy. "What you're describing," Sarah said slowly, "is essentially remaking galactic civilization from the ground up." "Yes." First Light on New Soil confirmed with a matter-of-fact certainty that only the young possess. "The current approach isn't working. It creates fear where there should be wonder, competition where there should be cooperation, isolation where there should be integration." The youngster gestured toward the viewing port, where other ships were arriving. Vessels from species that had never visited Nexus Station before, drawn by news of the successful integration projects. But change is already happening. Species that haven't spoken to each other in centuries are sharing knowledge. Technologies that were dismissed as impossible are solving problems no one thought could be addressed. Gardens are growing in places that were barren. Life is flourishing where there was only empty space. Sarah looked out at the arriving ships, crystalline Thurian vessels that sang with quantum harmonics, gaseous Altarian energy forms dancing between solar collectors, mechanical ships from traditional council species flying in formation with biological vessels that pulsed with their own inner light. The galaxy was indeed changing. The question was whether they could guide that change toward harmony or watch it fragment into chaos. "First Light," she said finally, "let's go make history." The young Vorthak's bioluminescent patterns brightened with joy, and Sarah realized that the real adventure was just beginning. The garden the young ones had grown was not just a place of beauty. It had been the seed of something far greater, something that might finally allow the galaxy to discover its true potential. 2 years after First Light on New Soil's proposal, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the Harmony, humanity's first hybrid biomechanical starship. The vessel itself was a testament to the new age of galactic cooperation, grown from Vorthak biological engineering, but enhanced with human mechanical systems, powered by Altarian energy manipulation, and navigated using Thurian quantum communication networks. The journey to the galactic edge had revealed wonders beyond anything the galaxy had previously imagined. Dark matter structures that Sings Between Stars could sense, but mechanical instruments couldn't detect, had proven to harbor forms of consciousness so alien that they challenged every assumption about what intelligence could be. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the contact fleet," announced Lieutenant Kim from the communication station. The young officer was one of the new generation trained in integrated biological technological systems, equally comfortable working with living computers and quantum networks. "Put it through," Sarah replied, though she could already guess the content of the message. Admiral Torres's voice filled the bridge, carrying news that no one had dared hope for just 5 years earlier. "Sarah, the Galaxy Assembly has just voted to formally dissolve the old council structure. The new Cooperative Federation of Worlds has been established with representatives from over 300 species, including 47 that were previously classified as non-contact due to incompatible technology or culture. Sarah felt a surge of pride and wonder. The transformation had been far more rapid and comprehensive than anyone had predicted. Once species began sharing their unique capabilities instead of conforming to artificial standards, the pace of discovery and cooperation had accelerated exponentially. "What about the integration projects?" she asked. "Beyond our most optimistic projections," Torres replied. "The Rigelian homeworld is showing full atmospheric recovery 6 months ahead of schedule. The Andromedan energy beings have successfully merged with Vorthack biological systems to create living space habitats that can support any form of life. And Sarah, they've done it. The Universal Ecosystem Protocol is working." The Universal Ecosystem Protocol was First Lyton New Soil's greatest achievement, a method for creating planetary environments that could simultaneously support species with completely different biochemical requirements. Worlds that had been written off as uninhabitable for most galactic species were being transformed into thriving multi-species colonies. Dr. Okafor, now Director of Biological Integration Studies, joined the conversation from her laboratory aboard the Harmony. "Admiral, what's the status of the Deep Void expedition?" Sings Between Stars and her crew have established contact with the Dark Collective, those consciousness clouds we detected last year. It turns out they've been trying to communicate with physical universe species for millions of years, but their thought processes are so different from ours that meaningful exchange seemed impossible. Sarah exchanged glances with her senior staff. The Dark Collective represented forms of intelligence that existed as patterns in dark matter, thinking thoughts that span millennia and experiencing reality in ways that biological creatures couldn't comprehend. "How did they finally manage communication?" Dr. Okafor asked. Torres chuckled. "Leave it to a Vorthack bio ship to find the solution." Sings Between Stars developed specialized neural interfaces that can process information at near-geological timescales. She spent 6 months learning to think slowly enough for the Dark Collective to understand, while they learned to compress their thoughts in a time frames biological minds can grasp. The implications were staggering. If communication was possible with consciousness forms that exotic, then perhaps intelligence in the universe was far more diverse and widespread than anyone had imagined. "What did they want to tell us?" Sarah asked. "That's the really extraordinary part," Torres replied. "They've been gardening on a galactic scale for millions of years, using dark matter manipulation to create conditions suitable for the emergence of physical life. Every star system, every planetary formation, every region where biological life has flourished, it's all been carefully tended by intelligences we never knew existed." The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed the magnitude of what they were hearing. The universe itself was a garden, tended by forms of consciousness that operated on scales of time and space beyond biological comprehension. "They want to meet the young ones who created the first garden," Torres continued. "They see the Vorthack children's work as the first successful attempt by physical universe species to engage in what they call reality gardening, the conscious creation of beauty and life on a cosmic scale." First Light on New Soil, now serving as the Harmony's Chief Cultural Integration Officer, spoke up from the Environmental Systems Station, where they had been working with the ship's biological components. "Commander, I request permission to return to our home system. If the Dark Collective wishes to meet with the garden creators, all of them should be involved, not just me." Sarah nodded. The young Vorthack had grown tremendously during their time aboard the Harmony, but their connection to the original garden and the other young creators remained strong. "Granted, we'll set course for the Vorthack system immediately." The journey home took them through regions of space that had been transformed by the new cooperative technologies. Stellar engineering projects using combined Altarian energy manipulation and Vorthack biological systems had restored dead solar systems to vibrant life. Space stations grown rather than built housed diverse communities of species that had never been able to coexist before. Most remarkably, they encountered other hybrid vessels, ships that combined the best technologies of multiple species in integrated wholes that were greater than the sum of their parts. Each ship was unique, reflecting the creativity and needs of its crew, yet all shared the same fundamental principle. Cooperation created possibilities that competition never could. When they reached the Vorthack system, Sarah was amazed to discover that the Garden of First Meetings had become something far beyond what the original young creators had imagined. The entire planet now hosted representatives from hundreds of species, each contributing to an ever-growing masterwork of integrated ecosystems. The original garden was still there, preserved as it had been when humanity first encountered it, but it now served as the seed from which a planetary garden had grown. Each region had been developed to showcase the aesthetic preferences and environmental needs of different species, yet all were integrated into a single, functioning biosphere. It's become a living symbol, growing toward light, explained as he welcomed them back to his world. He had aged gracefully during the years since their first meeting, taking on the role of Elder Gardener and helping coordinate the planetary ecosystem management. A symbol of what? Sarah asked. Of what the galaxy can become when each species contributes their gifts instead of hiding their differences. They were led to the new Great Grove, where the original garden creators had gathered for the meeting with the Dark Collective. Sarah was struck by how much the young Vorthak had matured, yet their enthusiasm and wonder remained undimmed. They had become teachers and guides for other young beings from across the galaxy, sharing their knowledge while continuing to learn and grow. First Light on New Soil reunited joyfully with their fellow creators, chattering in rapid Vorthak, while bioluminescent patterns of excitement flickered across their skin. The reunion was brief, however, as they prepared for the unprecedented contact with the Dark Collective. The communication setup required technologies from 17 different species working in concert. Thurian quantum communicators provided the interface. Altarian energy manipulation created the necessary field conditions. Human mechanical systems provided stability and control, and Vorthak biological networks processed the information flows. The result was a contact protocol that no single species could have developed alone. When the Dark Collective manifested, it was unlike anything the assembled beings had ever experienced. Patterns of darkness moved through space itself, creating structures visible only through their interaction with gravity and electromagnetic fields. The sense of vast, ancient intelligence was overwhelming. The translated communication came through in waves of concept and emotion rather than words. Young gardeners of the physical realm, you have learned the first lesson of conscious creation. You have discovered that life flourishes when different forms support each other rather than competing for dominance. This is the beginning of true intelligence on a cosmic scale. First Light on New Soil, speaking for the group of young creators, responded with typical directness. Honored Ancient Ones, we created beauty because we wanted to welcome strangers as friends. We had no idea we were learning cosmic lessons. The Dark Collective's response carried what could only be described as cosmic amusement. The most profound wisdom often appears as simple kindness to those who practice it naturally. You have shown the galaxy that consciousness is not about dominance, but about connection. This is why we tend the universe, to create conditions where such wisdom can emerge. Over the following hours, the Dark Collective shared insights that revolutionized galactic understanding of reality itself. The universe, they explained, was not a random collection of matter and energy, but a carefully maintained garden where consciousness could emerge, grow, and eventually learn to create its own beauty and meaning. Every species that learns cooperation instead of competition becomes a gardener of reality. The Dark Collective explained. Your galaxy has taken its first steps toward true cosmic citizenship. The young ones who planted the first seeds of understanding have begun a transformation that will eventually spread to other galaxies. But the most remarkable revelation came when the Dark Collective revealed that they weren't alone. Throughout the universe, other forms of cosmic intelligence were tending their own regions of space, all working together on a scale of cooperation that spanned billions of galaxies. You are now invited to join the Universal Garden, they announced. Species that learn to work together across all forms of difference can contribute to the maintenance and creation of reality itself. The young gardeners have shown that your galaxy is ready for this responsibility. The offer was staggering in its implications. Galactic civilization wouldn't just be about exploring and colonizing space. They would become active participants in maintaining and improving the universe itself. First Light on New Soil looked at Sarah with eyes that sparkled with the same wonder they had shown when first explaining their garden to confused human visitors. Commander Chun, I think we're going to need a bigger garden. Sarah laughed, feeling the joy and excitement that had characterized their journey from the very beginning. I think you're right. But we know how to start. One seed at a time, one friend at a time, one beautiful possibility at a time. As the communication with the Dark Collective concluded, Sarah looked around at the assembled beings. Vorthack gardeners working alongside human engineers, Thurian quantum specialists sharing insights with Altarian energy artists, and representatives from dozens of other species all focused on the same goal of creating beauty and fostering life. The garden that had started with young Vorthack wanting to welcome unknown visitors had grown to encompass their world, then their galaxy, and now the universe itself. But the principle remained the same. When different forms of intelligence worked together instead of against each other, the results were always more wonderful than anyone could imagine alone. The human was still amazed, but now the amazement was shared by an entire galaxy, and soon, if they were worthy of the trust being placed in them by the universe itself, the garden would keep growing, tended by gardeners of every possible form of consciousness, all working together to create beauty and meaning among the stars. In the end, Sarah realized the greatest discovery hadn't been the Vorthack gardens or their technologies or even the cosmic intelligences that maintained reality. The greatest discovery had been the simple truth that the young gardeners had known instinctively from the beginning. When